talked a little bit about people who've attempted to run for office and the hard, cold truth that they run into, which is that you may have good intentions and a lot of good grassroots support, but some of the first advice that you get is that you've got to raise money, money, money. And I'm recalling one of my favorite episodes from The Wire where they lock mayoral candidate Carcetti into an office and they tell him, we're not going to let you out until you make these phone calls to this list of people. And for the first hour, he's like throwing wadded up paper into a trash can. And finally, he breaks down after, I think, several hours of starvation and boredom to finally start calling those donors. And I guess what I would ask you is, do you recall the first time when you were running for an office and you had to pick up the phone and make a phone call to a donor, how that felt?
Yeah, so everybody, I'm Mike Gatto. I represent the 43rd District in the California State Assembly. The 43rd District starts in the Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles. It includes Silver Lake, Los Feliz, Atwater Village, Franklin Hills, Glendale, Burbank, Montrose, La Crescenta, La Cañada, and the Angeles National Forest to the Palmdale border. Oh, and also Hollywood and the Hollywood Hills. As you might have guessed, or as some of you might know, California's districts are huge. Assembly districts are 500,000 people, Senate districts are 1 million people. You can go through the math really quickly, and I am answering this question because this is the math that I went through. There are roughly 500,000 people in the district. Of those, roughly 250,000 of them are registered, or 250,000 of them are eligible to vote. Half of those are registered to vote. Depending on the election, if it's a presidential election, 80% will turn out. If it's a municipal election, 19% will turn out. Gubernatorial election is somewhere in between 30%. So you really quickly get to a conclusion, which all of us do, which is, okay, there's about 50, in some cases 100,000 people I need to reach in this district. The way to reach them, well, Facebook doesn't work, Twitter, not so much. You go through the list, can't afford radio ads, can't do cable. How do people in California reach voters? They do it with direct mail. So you go through the math and you say, well, I need to reach 100,000 people. The psychologists say that the average time, we share the same campaign manager, and he's fond of telling me that the average time it takes, that the average citizen, not people in this room, but the average citizen to read mail is 11 seconds. And that's as long as it takes to walk from the mailbox to the garbage can. I'm not making it up. So you have to repeat a message 3 times for it to sink in. Psychologists have shown that. So at a minimum, if I want to say to people, I'm Mike Gatto and I have black hair, I have to send that 3 times to 100,000 people, 50 cents per unit. Okay? So just to send out one mailer on one of my ideas, okay, and I'm bad with math, that's why I went to law school, but let's see, that's $150,000. Okay? In my campaign, I probably sent out 20 mailers, 24, something like that, because I wanted to talk about so many different things. So yeah, I do remember that day very well. I remember being sat down and thinking, I've got ideas. I think my ideas are valid. Can I get the LA Times to cover me? No. Can I get anybody in town to be interested? Probably not. The city's very distracted by car chases. So yeah, it's sobering, but yes, you do. It's daunting when
Do they have to lock you in a room?
No, I started treating it as a sport, and I put up a little wall chart, and I started, challenging myself because I knew that I wanted to get there, and I wanted to reach out to all the constituents that I had to reach out to.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here, and let me first thank Michelle Sutter for inviting me, all that she's done with Movie, and it's very exciting for me to be able to carry the bill, SB 1272, and look forward to working with her and all of you on that bill. I also recognize Kathy, who has done a fantastic job with Common Cause. Every day she fights a good fight. And for those of you who don't know Mike Gatto, he is a phenomenally effective legislator. You can go up to Sacramento and you could play golf all day if you want to, or you can get stuff done. And Mike goes up and he gets stuff done. He's passed numerous bills into law, and they've been effective laws that have changed and helped millions of constituents. So thank you, Mike, for that. So the answer to what was basically, what is it like to fundraise? So in 2002, I got elected to Torrance City Council, and the first few calls you make, or like the calls I make now, I've never gotten used to it. It's a combination of discomfort, sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's embarrassment. Imagine not speaking to your high school friend for 20 years. Your first phone call to them after a few pleasantries is to ask for money. It's hard. It's not something I like to do. Anyone who says they like to do it is not well. And it's extremely uncomfortable, and I hate it. That's why I was a co-op the Clean Money campaign. If we could have that, I would love my job so much more. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Okay. I was secretly throwing that soft pitch, hoping that Ted would say exactly that. So, okay. The last year has kept me very busy because it seems like every couple of days I get a phone call from a newspaper telling me, or a reporter telling me, so we're getting wind of another FBI investigation, and it's looking like the indictments are going to look like this. And I remember actually that last trip I went up to Sacramento, I got off the plane and I got a whole slew of emails that were talking about Senator Liew. Oh my God, he was the person who authored our online voter registration bill. And there were potentially going to be indictments around bribery and taking money. And I thought to myself, sadly, well, okay, it's bribery. I guess that happens, right? And by the time I got back on the plane, everybody in the plane was talking about not just bribery, but conspiracy to sell bazookas in exchange for money to a campaign. And that's coupled with, we had Senator Rod Wright, we had Senator Calderon, and then most recently Senator Berryhill, just to make sure that we had a bipartisan indictment list. And some of these are about campaign fundraising, some of them are not. But the question that I keep getting asked by the media is this a problem with a few bad apples, or is there an institutional problem? Are we setting, or even if it's not everybody who's tainted, are we setting people up for falling into this trap because we're constantly, whatever the reasons are we setting them up?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I really have a sort of mixed answer. I mean, going through the gentleman who recently got into legal troubles, I have not been in Sacramento that long. I've been up there for it'll be 4 years in a little bit. I tried never to lose my perspective of not being up there, but I've talked with people who've been up there a long time and who've known these gentlemen for a long time, and just asked them, hey, did you ever know? Did you ever have a whiff? There are people, for example, in Sacramento who have just spotless reputations. I mean, Ted Liew is one of them. People just know. They never get, it's so weird to define something in the negative, but nobody ever gets creeped out by Ted Liew. People always get good feelings from him. There's never been an uncomfortable situation that gets back to you where, there's some sort of fundraiser or something like that. It just doesn't happen. And so, there are most people in town said, well, no, we have a good sense of who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. But, some of these allegations were shocking. The gun running allegations shocked everybody. I don't think there's anybody in town who could have predicted that. And the question, are we setting people up? I don't think there's ever an excuse for that type of thing. I think, you are who you are, your ethics are your ethics, they shouldn't change. The pressures to get reelected are immense. But I'll tell you what I think sometimes makes it a little easier. When I was running for office, I was not given much of a chance to win. People in Sacramento who thought I had a chance were shouted down repeatedly. And, I think your first runs were pretty tough too. And, when you're calling your high school buddies, as Senator Liew said, it's a little different than calling a special interest group. I mean, it's weird to mentally distinguish between sources of money. But the truth is, when there's a real human being, Los Angeles City has wonderfully progressive campaign finance laws. And they treat they give value to getting a check from a real human being, and they match it. They have a public finance program. And, it's a little different when you got there, when you got to the dance, as they say, based on contributions from people in this room. $5 here, $100 there, versus the people who just raw special interests all day long, all the time. So, I think that, if we could somehow have a system that would reward people who are supported by people, then I think it would probably get us in a better place, and we wouldn't have these individuals who are so used to going to the special interest well.
So in terms of their senators that have been indicted, if the facts are as alleged, I think they should be convicted and then punished to the fullest extent of the law. There's simply no excuse for that behavior, which is criminal. But, there are some differences between what they did. So in terms of Senator Liew, there's nothing we can do here that's going to tell someone that arms trafficking is wrong, right? It is what it is. But, in terms of Senator Calderon, I think there were some issues that did relate somewhat to campaign finance. And I think if we did remove incentives for people to want to constantly seek money, then it might mitigate some of the things that you've seen, which is why I authored Senate Bill 2, which is now in the Assembly. But when I first authored it, I went to a monthly disclosure. Right now, you can go for 6 months without disclosing who you raised from, how much you raised, and so on. And I thought if we went to monthly disclosure, that would provide a lot more disclosures as what was going on. Fortunately, there's a committee I went through stripped that part out. So now that all this has happened, we're thinking maybe putting that back in. And again, the reason I supported Clean Money campaign is I think that would prevent a lot of this from happening. But, one of the senators his issue was residency. It's, do you believe that your legislator should live in the district that he or she represents? So that's sort of a different issue. I do think that if you change the incentives, though, you will see probably some better behavior. But at some level, there are going to be bad apples anywhere, and some of them are just going to violate the law. And when they violate the law, they need to be convicted and punished. But, as Mike Gatto will say, and we all know, 99% of the people who are in government are trying their best, trying to be ethical, trying to do what's right for constituents. And it really pains us when some of our colleagues do these crazy things. So.
Mike, do you put that percentage that high?
Perhaps not that high.
We'll include commissioners, too.
Nobody's going to tweet this.
No, I do think the lion's share of people in public service are there to work hard and to serve their constituents well. And it is really disappointing when the bad apples color the public's perception, because it's been a very rough last couple months. A lot of people will jokingly ask you if you're running guns, and that's a weird environment to work in.
So it's an interesting thing, and I will agree with Senator Liew that you've got to distinguish between these different senators. But Calderon is one of those legislators who, I guess I can say it, you can't say it, but I can say it, that amongst lobbyists, they would talk amongst themselves and say, wow, I just had a meeting with Calderon and it sort of felt like a shakedown. And, so the allegations against Calderon are that, amongst many other things, that he funneled money through a nonprofit in order to get his brother a position as a consultant or to funnel money to his brother. And then additionally funneled money through a not real movie studio a la Argo to provide money to his daughter and also to fund school tuition for his son. There's probably other things that will come out, but clearly there's a lot of complicated funneling of money. Senator Berryhill, to some extent, there's a similar kind of thing going on, but this is not necessarily for a person's personal gain, but he funneled money from, the allegations are, from his campaign to the Republican local party to give to his brother's campaign who is running for assembly. So I think, to some extent, what we are talking about, some of the similar strands are whether or not these senators felt that they were above the law. Did they feel that the campaign finance laws are an annoyance and therefore don't need to be abided by, or if they're a gray area and we've got to figure out the loopholes to take advantage of them, or that nobody was watching, or what? How is it that you go so far astray? Senator Liew, a couple days ago, President Pro Tem Steinberg closed down Senate, said no more committee hearings, we're going to have a day of talking amongst ourselves, and we want to focus on ethics. We need to reboot and have an honest conversation, and those conversations were closed door. Without revealing what was talked about, do you think that there's a culture change going on? Do you think that people are waking up? Are people being shocked into, being more vigilant?
I thought it was helpful. I think it's always helpful to review all the ethical rules we have to follow, as well as the campaign finance disclosure rules. But again, if you sort of look at the allegations of what happened, one of the senators, sold a Senate resolution for $6,800. We all know that's wrong. You don't have to teach us that is wrong. And so if you look at what they did, it's just
to some extent,
beyond
it's
the
just
pale.
a person's moral compass and whether it's
Correct.
pointing the right direction. Okay.
Right, so if you're unethical, no amount of ethical training is going to change you. But it was helpful, I think, particularly for staff, which, sometimes they do get put into ambiguous situations, and it was helpful for them to know who to call and who to talk to. And I thought that was a helpful day.
Do you think that it would be helpful to run campaign consultants through that training? Because sometimes I wonder if a lot of that advice, so we had two candidates who said that they'd run at one time for an office, and the advice that they were getting was from campaign consultants who said, what you need to do is blah, 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 and sometimes it's a cynical breed of people who immediately say, fundraise, 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 and, I think we need to run them through.
So my experience with my campaign consultants, they actually don't talk to me about the fundraising part. They just have me go do that.
Go do that,
So, yes.
yeah. Okay. You don't have a cozy relationship where you hang out with your campaign consultant?
Well, one of the guys who worked on my campaign taught me how to bake forno pizza outdoor, like the Neapolitan pizza recently. But other than that, no, we don't really hang out.
Okay. So one of the things that we want to think about is each of you has introduced a bill to try to address this problem, the larger problem of money in politics. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the bill itself, which actually up until now we've had a couple of folks who've gone through AJR 1 as well as SB 1272. But also, what are the hurdles to trying to get those passed? Like if people in this room knew, what are you up against? What are the kinds of questions or opposition that you get? And if you had to give yourself, odds on, how hard it would be to pass, what are those odds like?
Well, whenever you're trying to change, the institutional systems of campaign finance or any institutional system, you face long odds. That's the way it goes. The reason why I introduced AJR 1 is because I came here today, to hopefully provoke a good discussion and also to gather the collective wisdom of this room. Obviously, there's a lot of people in this room who are very caring about this issue, who have lived it for a long time and who understand it really well. And, I wanted to just be thought-provoking and mention a couple hurdles that I had and just be candid with you and tell you the things that I have. Because, every time you introduce a bill, it's pretty rare that a bill is black and white. You sometimes have some concerns and some hurdles. And is everyone familiar with AJR 1? Kind of? Okay, so, look, the efforts so far to reform Citizens United have been more or less symbolic. And those have value. The city of Los Angeles voting 71% or 72% to 77% to say that they don't like Citizens United is symbolic. But you guys have heard the stories, right? About why it's so hard for California to get resources in Congress and everything like that. Part of it is because Ted Lieu's not there yet. But I mean, the rest of it is because John Boehner doesn't care about California. We're a blue state, right? We always are going to be. He's not, our state is never going to be in play for the presidential races. So John Boehner is not going to listen to California. He's not going to listen to Los Angeles. Justice Clarence Thomas, Justice Scalia, they don't care what the city of Los Angeles does. We're the left coast, right? We're those weirdos, according to those guys, right? So, I mean, I introduced AJR 1 because I wanted to be as aggressive as I could. And there's two processes for actually amending the Constitution in the United States. One of them is the traditional process we're all familiar with. That is, an amendment goes through Congress by a 2/3 vote. It then goes to the states. The states can ratify it by a 3/4 vote of all the states, and then it becomes law. How many people think John Boehner is going to let a Citizens United amendment through the? Okay, all right. So there's this other process. It's really arcane. It's in Article 5 of the federal Constitution, and it allows the states to get up and demand that Congress act. If 2/3 of the states pass one of these resolutions demanding that Congress acts as a ministerial body, and they have to call a constitutional convention on the issue. Now, people say, well, when was the last time that worked? It never has. It never has. But I put a big fat asterisk next to that statement. It's actually worked twice. One was Amendment 17, which is a direct election of senators, and the other one was a repeal of prohibition. What happened is states started passing these resolutions saying, Congress, you need to call a convention to allow voters to directly elect senators. Congress, you need to call a convention to repeal prohibition. And right before the 2/3 threshold was met, Congress actually acted. They heard the will of the people. And so that's what my AJR 1 does. It would actually force Congress to act. And I've gotten calls from Republicans in Pennsylvania and in Arizona and Montana and Democrats from around the country who are excited about this and want to participate in this type of thing. And so I would hope that that type of thing would actually work. Now, do I have concerns? Absolutely. And I'll get into some of those concerns later because I want to throw it over to the crowd at some point about some of the concerns that I have. But you know, to try to get it passed, I face, you face skeptical lawmakers, you face people saying, well, what will the people do if they get a chance to open up the Constitution? And then I remind them, well, it is the people's Constitution. But yeah, it's a challenge, and I'll go into the second challenges a little bit later, which are more substantive.
Great.
Thank you. I think AJR 1 is terrific. I think we need to have multiple paths to try to overturn Citizens United. So SB 1272 builds upon what the city of Los Angeles did a few years ago with Prop C, where the voters overwhelmingly said they want to overturn Citizens United. And the difference with having a state do it is if enough states also have their voters express the same opinion, that does send a very powerful message to Washington, D.C., that we want you to do a constitutional amendment, and the states will be with you. And it's also sparking a national movement to get that done. To me, I don't really care how Citizens United gets overturned as long as it is overturned. And as you know, it's such a stupid decision. Mike and I happen to be lawyers, but it just doesn't take a lawyer to figure out that you can't date a corporation. You can't have dinner with a corporation. You can't watch a movie with a corporation. I don't see how a corporation can be a person. And so we just need to reverse that decision. And whatever path we can take to get there, I'll support.
Great. Absolutely, glad for that. Okay, so if you could tell the people in this room to do two things tonight, before tonight, along the way home, whatever that is, what would those two things be?
Okay. Well, I want to throw a big stink bomb in the room and ask for your help because I did a forum on this issue at the Beverly Hills Bar Association with some of the brightest legal minds of the West Coast, and this is a question that I have asked myself as my resolution goes through the process because I hope it never comes up publicly because I don't have an answer to it, and it takes a lot for a politician who has pride to get up and say I don't have an answer to it, There was an article that appeared in Yale Law Review, authored by Professor McConnell, and he said Citizens United was the stupidest decision ever. It was wrongly decided. The justices got it all wrong. This is not an issue of free speech. It's an issue of freedom of the press. And had it been decided under freedom of the press, it would have been unanimous for still allowing corporate money in politics. And I said, whoa. And I read this Yale Law Review article really closely, and I don't have an answer to this. So I know a lot of you live this every day, and I'm hoping people might have an answer. How in the modern world, and this was the gist of this Law Review article, how in the modern world could we define press in such a way that would prohibit corporate funds being spent on politics? So just let me back up a minute. Does anyone know what a super PAC is, right? It's a federal independent expenditure only committee. Corporate funds go into a bank account. The bank account is spent influencing elections. There's no coordination with candidate. Those are the three qualities. Comedy Central, is that a super PAC? Jon Stewart spent every day in the last election cycle making jokes about Mitt Romney. So if we passed the constitutional amendment that we're all seeking, could a government prohibit Jon Stewart? Citizens United was a movie. It was a movie. So if a movie comes out around elections talking about, let's say Hillary's on the ballot in 2016, and a movie comes out talking about Eleanor Roosevelt and comparing all the good things she did to the good things Hillary did, is that to influence an election? Could they prohibit corporate funds from being spent on that movie? This is what I'm wrestling with. I don't have an answer. I really don't. I've yet to hear a good answer. I've asked this to every law professor who has the same beliefs of all of us in this room. And, if you start getting, some people say, well, let's just define press as the for-profit press, the New York Times. Well, guess what? NPR then. What about the blogger down the street? If he was funded by Google or something, or if he was funded by some corporation, could he spend that money, to influence an election? So it's a tough thing. I mean, I think if we actually get the amendment we want, we have to be very, very careful on how it's defined. Otherwise, we could probably hurt press. Oh, we have an answer in the back.
Yeah, I think that if we can get free airtime for the politicians to be able to speak, because that's really what we're trying to get, is visibility for the politicians that don't have money to buy airtime on TV or, other types of publication. Can we pass a law, like in some countries where the TV channels have to show a certain amount of politicians' campaigns based on how many members they have in their party? And how would that look like legislatively?
Yeah, that is probably, that's one of the best solutions I've heard, but just keep in mind, we're all from Los Angeles, and we all know people who think, I'm so beautiful. If I only got exposure, I would become a famous actress. Or we know realtors who crave attention because it helps them sell houses. But in my district, we joke, God, I hope nobody ever figures out that if you put your name on the ballot, you get all this exposure in the media, and
Or when we had the recall elections for governor, there were 135
porn stars,
candidates.
yeah, exactly.
So do all 135, but
It's
good
something
point,
to wrestle
good
with.
point.
But what I was saying is your party has to support you, and your party has to have a certain amount of members in their party, certain amount of, depending on the
So
population, that's the amount of time.
Certain level of qualification, we can figure out what that is, right?
Then the party bosses.
Okay, right, okay. So, did you want to throw out two things?
So 2 things. And this is going to be specifically related to Senate Bill 1272. If any of you have Republican friends, have them call Republican legislators in California, ask them to see if they could come to support this bill. And second, write an email or letter to Governor Jerry Brown commending him for the phenomenal job he's done, and then ask him to sign Senate Bill 1272.
Okay. And what vote thresholds do each of you need to get out of the legislature? How many? Do you need simple majority or is it a 2/3?
It depends on, it's a complicated question, so it depends on how it's worded. So
Okay.
I have an offline conversation with you.
Okay.
And mine is simple majority. It's just any state can pass these resolutions. A lot of red states have passed resolutions like mine for a federal balanced budget amendment. So, and they're actually one state away from getting the 2/3 from having a constitutional convention on that. So, It's amazing, yeah, this is a real nationwide movement just on different issues.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear, Jeff, would you address Mike's question? Because we were in a meeting with Mike and we posed the same.
Okay, there's a microphone over there.
I don't know if you quite understand the question, but I mean, you know, I'd love to hear Jeff, who has spent years, you know.
It's the corporate meeting.
Yeah, no, I got it. It's a good question, a similar one to the gentleman here who asked about unintended consequences. And thank you both for your leadership on this stuff. And the question's an important one. And, you know, there's no guru who's going to answer it, including me, because that's what America's about. So that would be my response, is what this amendment does is restore the constitutional framework that we had for 200 years. And that didn't mean that any of these questions were answered. And indeed, it is, in theory, possible that Citizens United would have come out the same way. I think, as Jessica Levinson said, you know, there were a lot of ways the court could have gone to say this is a nonprofit corporation. There's lots of law that why that matters. Our brief in the religious rights case goes into that a little bit. I'll send it to you. And then, you know, it was a movie. There were a lot of reasons why, under the McCain-Feingold law, they could have easily not gone down the road. So I think that the response is this amendment movement does not abolish the Supreme Court. It does not simplify constitutional issues. There'll always be difficult issues. There'll always be the job of the court to answer those questions about what is press, when is it press, and when is it money being deployed as power. That's their job. They got the answer wrong, and we're going to fix the answer, but we won't be able to resolve this for all time. And I, too, as a lawyer, find often it's the bar associations who are the most skeptical, but frankly, you know, they are going to have to work to figure it out, because I think we're going to do this, and we'll have our Constitution, and freedom of press and freedom of speech will always be difficult issues. So that's my overview. I won't hog the mic too long, but there's a lot of detail at our website, and I'd be happy to talk with you further. And we have a legal advisory committee as well, which would be happy to help work with you on framing these responses. But freedom of press, for instance, is different than freedom of speech, but the Supreme Court has never had to develop that. They've always just said freedom of speech. We think that, well, you know, you got to do your job. You got to start defining what does freedom of press mean. The New York Times has come out in support of this amendment. Surely, as a press, they would have, and they actually called Justice Alito to account, because he had said New York Times versus Sullivan would be a famous First Amendment free speech case, would have been reversed by this amendment, and the Times said, oh no, it wouldn't have, and that's New York Times versus Sullivan. So, you know, this is restoring what we've always had in the Constitution. We're not amending the First Amendment. We're restoring the First Amendment, but that leaves a whole lot of complicated questions. But I think if the case had been called, say, one example, Exxon versus FEC, and Exxon had said, we want to spend $1 billion on Hillary the movie, can we do it? I think nobody would have said, oh, of course, that's no problem. And by saying, if they put a label, well, what about Exxon Press? We'd still say, no, stop. That's democracy. So I think...
But just to sharpen the issue a little bit for the discussion, and I'll be very quick, just two things. The McConnell Law Review article made 2 points, and the first one was, there actually has been a Supreme Court decision on this very topic. It was in the 60s. It was the Berger Court. It was a unanimous decision. And in that court decision, there was a union who had a union newspaper. It was like the Pittsburgh Steelworkers Gazette or something like that. It was a real newspaper. I mean, did people read it? Was it the New York Times? Not really. But they used a mixture of, I want to say, corporate and union funds, unlimited, to print this newspaper. And they did what newspapers do. They editorialized in favor of candidates. And some people look at the LA Times and say, that's a biased newspaper. Some people look at the LA Weekly, the Daily News, and say, that's a biased newspaper. Well, people looked at this Union Gazette and they said, that's a biased newspaper. They sued. They said this is violating all campaign finance reform, campaign laws. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court unanimously said, how do we determine whether a newspaper has validity or not? We can't say that, the guy standing on the corner like our founding fathers did with a printing press, handing out something he calls a newspaper, all the way up to the Economist and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. We can't get into this discussion of what is a valid newspaper. And that's what makes it so hard, because, we talk about campaign consultants and ethics. I guarantee that if the Supreme Court, we get our amendment, we promulgate rules, the Supreme Court tries to define a newspaper, I guarantee there will be campaign consultants who go right out there and they incorporate the Los Angeles, newspaper, and they just have, and again, you get into the definitions.
Isn't that what slate mailers are, essentially?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling, because if you look at the breadth of newspapers in Los Angeles, for example, in my district, there's the LA Times, which you pay for. There's the LA Weekly, which is free. And there's even another one called the Los Feliz Ledger, which is not only free, but it's dropped off on your door every month. Let's see, coming to your house, piece of paper, sounds like a campaign mailer. So if they take a biased position, you see how hard it is, right? And the McConnell Law Review article made the point that for all of us who care about overturning this, we have to be very careful that we don't clog up our courts with people suing, saying, oh, wait a minute, like that newspaper over there, you have corporate shareholders and you endorse Barack Obama over Mitt Romney, corporate funds influencing elections, we're going to close down this newspaper.
Can I just speak to that nuance, because it is an important one, but that is a newspaper. That is fine. That's why I think, Citizens United could have come out, well, that's a movie, but, in fact, Citizens United could have applied to the FEC to be approved as press. They didn't. They wanted to bring the case. They have since applied to be treated as press. So there are mechanisms. These are different newspapers. My point is, if it's Exxon dumping $1 billion into a super PAC, we know that's not a newspaper. That doesn't mean there aren't hard cases, but a newspaper is a newspaper, media is media. And with due respect to Professor McConnell, the framers wrote freedom of press and freedom of speech as two different concepts, and it is complicated, but it's complicated. This doesn't solve the complication, but the amendment language actually says nothing about this amendment shall affect the freedom of the press. Now, again, that doesn't solve all the difficult issues. There will be difficult issues.
Let me just ask a question theoretically, okay? So we know that a newspaper is a publication that comes out more or less regularly and reports on the news. Are there biased newspapers? Everybody in this room would say yes. In Los Angeles, people think the Los Angeles Times is liberal, the Daily News is a little bit more right of center. We all know this instinctually. We know the LA Weekly is kind of libertarian, kind of liberal. We know the Bents. The Koch brothers have billions of dollars to spend. What would stop them from buying a newspaper, and we'd be right back at square one?
I don't think so. Rupert Murdoch has billions of dollars and owns Fox News, but we know the difference between Fox News.
It's a myth. It's a myth, first of all, that the Los Angeles Times is a liberal paper. They took the opportunity to come out against Prop C 4 different times. As an activist, the frustration here is that we know it's not a free and fair press. It's a corporate media, right? And we heard some very firsthand stuff this morning about the degree to which progressive views aren't heard anywhere. So
your solution would be, let's allow regulation of the press.
I'd say let's break them up is what I'd say. I'd say, Comcast, Time Warner, no, that's not democracy. We don't, the multiplicity of voices that the court speaks about and our right to hear a multiplicity of voices, honestly, it's a joke. It really is. That doesn't exist. So I don't, these kinds of red herring arguments make my head explode, because it's not the reality of the situation. And if they want to try and drill down into some kind of legalese, I do call these guys, judicial jujitsu, these people. They have this idiomatic literalism that money talks, right? It's nuts. They don't want to do it. And Professor McConnell, I don't know him. I'm going to go try and find this law review article of his. But it has no validity in a real world scenario. That's not the world we're living in. We don't have a free and fair press. We have a very narrow window of stuff. While, people while we are sending troops all around the Ukraine, we're sitting here in America talking about Clive and Bundy. So what is going on? That's
Now,
it.
Let's
Amanda?
make sure that folks who've got questions, and I think that I saw a hand back there too, so go ahead.
I guess I just wanted to throw my 2 cents into the hat. Our press has never been unbiased or fair. The pamphlets that started off as our papers were always for one party or the other. They were always, for the Tories or whatever. So the idea that Citizens United, if it had been decided the way Professor McConnell said, would have changed things, I think it just maybe would have set things back a little bit. But I'm actually for it. Let's have more divided press because at least they'd be putting out an opinion instead of hiding it. I'd love to see them more in passion instead of hiding things. And I think that's interesting. Citizens United really, I think, separated people from government. I think that it makes people who want to run for government more beholden, of course, to the people who raise money. And so it separates them from us because most of us don't have that money to give. But the thing I want to impress upon you is that they still answer to you. They still do because your votes are the ones that keep them in office. And even though right now they're trying very hard in some states to keep people from voting, as we heard from what's his name, that the fewer people that vote, the more influence and the better they have. Thank you. That's the most important thing because they still have to get your votes on election day. So I just want to encourage you guys, don't give up on voting. That is the most important weapon in your arsenal, and keep people voting. Thank you. I apologize, it wasn't a question.
Next question. Keep it quick because we're coming up on 4:30, and what I think I'll do is I'm going to let you all just throw out your comment or question, but I'll stop you at 30 seconds so that we give some time for our electeds to give their last comments. Go ahead.
Okay, so quickly, I remember 2 years ago, there was a wonderful bill, AGR 32, sponsored by Wachowski, Honorable Mr. Gatto up there, and Allen, and I just wanted to know if you could briefly talk about what happened with that back up. And remember, I know it lost in a Judiciary Committee vote in the Assembly, and I just wanted to bring it up and let you speak on that.
Cool. All right, so you got that? Hold on. What happened to Wachowski's bill, 22?
Well, this is
This
Wachowski
is
got
32.
around.
This is 32. This is
Yeah.
the one that had the stronger corporations are people money as a speech language in it. And
You're going to hold on to that answer, and then we're going to get you to articulate what your question is.
Yeah, thanks, and try and put it in the form of a question. So is it possible that the real question is not what is not press, but what is or is not electioneering? And because that's such a complicated question, is it possible that maybe the best approach would just be to let's get AJR 1 through, and thank you so much for introducing it, and then let the convention wrestle with it. There's so much that we wouldn't be able to resolve.
That's
today.
exactly my thought. I mean, that's why I'm doing it. I mean, we're on the same side. I'm just saying it's not an easy path. These are tough.
Okay. Yes, comment, question.
Well, I had a lot of comments from that last conversation, but I will keep those to myself. My question, though, is I've been, given it's a state panel, I've been quite surprised by our governor, and that, things actually have passed, some things have actually passed the legislature that I thought were going in the right direction, and then he has vetoed or, not signed them, and, quite to my surprise of all of the years that I supported him. But I'm just wondering what your experience is and what can be done. Is that an impetus, an impediment to us now? Or, what's our status with the governor?
Okay, comments on the governor, all right?
First off, I'd like to just thank Senator Liew and Assemblyman Gatto for co-authoring previous California Disclose Act. My question is, what importance do you think, how important do you think it is for true disclosure in political ads, such as outlined by the Sunshine and Campaigns Act and SB 52?
That might be a Senator Liew question, all right?
For the two elected officials, I assume you talk to your Republican colleagues. What reason do they give for voting against something as simple as a Disclose Act?
Good. Why are they against this Close Act? All right, last question.
Okay, for me, a press has to include a certain percentage of investigative reporting. It has to address valuable issues of the issues they're reporting at fairly, and that would be my definition of press.
Okay. So the first one, did you hold all that?
I think so.
Okay, why don't we take a little bit at a time?
Rapid
and-
fire?
Yeah, go ahead.
AGR 32 was a similar resolution. It was kind of a hybrid between Mr. Liew's current bill and my current AGR 1. It failed in the Assembly Judiciary Committee. I mean, we could not get the votes from Dems or Republicans. This was co-authored by 3 of us, and it failed in the first committee. And, earlier we were asked what hurdles we have. Well, there's one hurdle. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are very hostile to change. So, thank you.
Isn't Assemblymember Wajkowski the chairman of the Assembly
This was
Judiciary?
before he was chairman.
Okay.
This was a couple of years ago. Yeah.
All right, and then, so let's keep going. Why don't we define this as electioneering? Why shouldn't this be a question about electioneering, and what is electioneering as
Sure.
opposed to what's press?
And the McConnell Law Review article went into that. It talked about how much the press has changed since our framers' days, and how the press literally used to be a printing press, and someone would go on the corner and hand out flyers, and they were very biased, and very, very good point. But going back to my Jon Stewart example, corporate funds go into a bank account. The bank account then funds a media outlet. The media outlet communicates with voters. He has a clear bent. He says something bad about Mitt Romney every day leading up to the election. Would we want to live in a country where someone could sue to seek an injunction to shut down Jon Stewart? That's how tough our definitions have to be. When we have this convention, and this is why I'm throwing it out, you are the leading minds in this movement. You are the people who care the most. Start thinking about it, because there has to be a good definition of electioneering so that we don't clog the courts with constant battles over because then you start looking into people's minds, right? You start looking into, well, I think your motivation was electioneering. You really wanted to determine the election when you published this picture of Mike Gatto looking ugly or something. You really have to watch what is election and make a really rock solid definition. So start thinking about it.
Sunshine and Campaigns Act. You want to talk about there was a bunch of bills. It was SB 2, 3, and 52, and 27.
I supported them all.
Supported them all?
I still support the California Disclose Act. I think it's a great act, and hopefully we can get that through. One of the sort of issues you have with all these campaign finance reform measures is they do take a 2/3 vote. And we like to think all Democrats think the same. That's not always the case, and so sometimes it's just hard to get a 2/3 vote through. And I think that's one reason some of these campaign finance reform measures have not passed yet.
Yeah, because they take
But so critical. I mean, as we wait for the things we're all here to do today, it could be a 5-year process, 1-year process, 10-year process, 20-year process. Disclosure, absolutely key. At least it's a halfway measure where we know where the money's coming from.
Right, and I think that there are at least 2 things that are in our recent past that, I think can mobilize us and light a fire under legislators who are on the fence, right? One is that in 2012, we had a shocking amount of dollars that came into the state, much of it undisclosed, 14 million pumped into an initiative or a couple of initiative campaigns. And part of that package of Sunshine and Campaigns is to try to address those monies that are coming in from out of state and played through a shell game of nonprofits to ultimately try to influence the outcome of our elections. And then the second piece is we've got these scandals, and just like Professor Levinson said, sometimes, the silver lining of Watergate was that the American people woke up and realized, oh my God, we've got to change this. And so potentially the silver lining of so many indictments happening in the Senate is, wait a second, the system in how we elect our electeds may not be 100%, and how can we make that a better system? So to the extent that that mobilizes and sort of reminds our legislators that they should be on it, after 2012, we had a whole slew of disclosure bills come out, and after this set of scandals around senators, we've got an unbelievable number of ethics bills. And I think what we need to do as citizens is remind our electeds, these are issues that are important. Don't treat them as revolving door things and tomorrow I'll forget about it. I do care about these, and I want you to support them and push on the bills that are still hanging out there. So there are a couple of bills, the Sunshine and Campaigns combination included 3 or 4 bills. It was SB 2, SB 3, SB 27, and SB 52.
A hand of applause for that memory.
Yeah. So, hold on to those, and if you can't remember it, go to the Common Cause website. I haven't pitched that, but commoncause.org/CA. We've got all those bills on there. All right, let's see.
The Republican
Why do
question.
people argue against disclose act, or disclosure? What's the argument?
What I have heard from Republican colleagues, there isn't much. Most of it, most people don't make an argument. They just vote no, and they hope that nobody will notice their vote. Some of it, though, I mean, the people willing to go on mic and talk about it will often say something like, "You just want to scapegoat my sources of funding." This is them talking. You just want to scapegoat my sources of funding. You're going to cause people to be criticized publicly because they're sources of funding, and blah blah blah. And I think there's a fear that they have about that. But I mean, you got to be who you are. You got to own up to who's funding you, and whether it's your high school buddies or whether it's Chevron Corporation, right? So you got to own who you are, and I think it's crucial we pass those disclosed.
Fantastic. All right, last question for both of you. If you could wave a magic wand, setting aside all the political impediments and how hard it is to do things, what's the one change that you would do?
Well, I'm going to talk about
In
two
the
things,
arena of
because
money and politics. Let me put it
Oh,
that
there
way.
we go. Because I was actually going to talk about climate change, but, all right. I would reverse Citizens United. I would simply say corporations are not people. It has just caused this enormous flood of money into our political system, which I don't think anyone sits there and looks at it and goes, hey, that's a really good thing. And so I could wave a magic wand, it would be that.
I would rethink the whole notion of a corporation. Corporations are only about 200-something years old. They were founded for shipping. It was the concept that you could not ship something on the high seas without so many risks that nobody would engage in shipping unless you were allowed a corporate form. And I think that, we have to consider, have corporations really taken over so many of the functions in society that they were never meant to take over? And yeah, so I mean, a clear decision that they're not people, and that we can actually punish people who are members of corporations who do wrongdoing in the name of a corporation. I mean, that is absolutely right.
And I have a final question for you. Obviously, all of us in this room really want to help both of you get your bills through the California legislature. What is the most effective thing that we can do as citizens to encourage? Is it, do our phone calls the most impactful? Are marches the most impactful? Are rallies? Should we, be writing letters to the editor? What is the thing that will most convince your colleagues in Sacramento that these bills you have offered and the resolution you have offered are worthy of their attention and need to be passed?
So let's see, if I had to pick of the two different types of media, there's that thing again that you talked about, I would think letters to the editor are very valid, because you get the newspaper's attention, and they actually pay attention, and they cover more important issues. If they think that their readership, which is paying the little quarters in the slot, are actually caring about this issue. So letters to the editor are just immensely effective. And then emails to legislators, wherever you live, but also emails to legislators from around the state. Those are effective. I mean, my staff, when I'm voting on something, they say, hey, this is what your constituency thinks. And I think that's really powerful, because the person who said that ultimately we do answer the people, that is true. And, just weighing in on this issue is really the greatest thing you can do.
I would agree that letters to editor are important, op-eds, anything with the media, just because there's a wider range of readership. And then in terms
Even if
of
they don't print it?
contacting, I'm sorry,
Even if they don't print it?
you'd be surprised at, newspapers do get a lot of letters to editors, but they also sort of get a lot from the same people.
Right.
And so if you just try a few times, you'd be surprised you could get published.
Okay.
And then in terms of contacting your legislator, let me sort of explain to you how many bills we vote on every 2 years. And we're in 2-year cycles. Mike Gatto and I vote about 5,000 times, yes or no. And for, I don't know, 80-some% of those bills, we don't get a single phone call, a single email, a single letter to the editor. So when you start doing that, it actually causes us and our staff to start paying attention and go, what is this? What is this issue? What is this bill? And so that's very.
So did our 19,000 petitions make an impact in the committee, do you think?
4 co-authors.
Yeah, right. So, next committee, everybody, we need you again, signing those petitions, sending those faxes.
And let me just say, as an organizer, 2 things annoy legislators a lot, but I love doing them. I like picking a day that we're all going to call in on, and I'm so sorry, but it so works. There is nothing better than getting the Senate President Pro Tem's office to call you and say, please tell them to stop, because you know then that we've got their attention. So pick a day. Maybe it's the 28th of every month, and that's the day that we just start calling everybody down the line, or calling the leaders. Okay? Second thing is, let's amplify our voices. So one person calling, that they count these, they tally them and they count them, but also each one of us belongs to an organization or a couple of organizations, and we should be approaching each one of our other organizations to say, hey, think about this, because that's when, again, you amplify your voice. When you go in there and you say, for instance, my local chapter of the AARP or the League of Women Voters or the Rotary Club or the local Democratic Club or whatever supports this, right? That also, that's a bigger tally for a lot of electeds. So do that too. Great, thank you so much.
Great, thank you all so much.